happy to be here with you. My name is Labbar. I'm a PhD candidate of Faculty of Educational Science in Morocco. I'm working on language barriers and assessment validity in Moroccan science classroom. Evidence from diagnostic testing. To start this presentation, we will generally discuss the following key points: introduction, methods, results, discussion, and we will finish with the conclusion. As for introduction, science, equity, assessment, and language. Well, language plays a central role in both learning and assessment, especially in multilingual contexts like Morocco, where the language of instruction often differs from students' understanding, and especially students' mother tongue. In our case, French is used to teach most scientific subjects, while the majority of students are primarily educated in Arabic. This linguistic situation creates a unique challenge for both teaching and assessment, because at this case and at this point, students are not only trying to understand complex scientific concepts, but they must also do so in a language that they haven't fully truly mastered yet. As you can see here, the assessment or the diagnostic assessment framework came from a very early work done in 1917 by Bloom. Well, Bloom's framework on formative and summative assessment recognized and emphasized assessment as a tool to improve students' learning rather than just measuring performance. Later on, in 2000, as international frameworks, the OECD and the UNESCO recognized assessment or diagnostic assessment as a key tool for equity and inclusion and education mainly for everyone, for all. Later on, this trend extended to Morocco, starting from 1999 till 2019. Morocco did a very long list of ambitious reforms in education, aiming to improve language, learning, and fairness, and improve the general aspects of education generally in Morocco. Well, despite this, persistent challenge remains. Language remains a barrier for students, as they still struggle to demonstrate scientific understanding in French, especially in science classes, math, and physics. In this work, we aim to examine how the language of assessment influenced the accuracy of diagnostic results and the interpretation of student learning difficulties. To do so, we must ask a question which is obvious at this point. That is, to what extent do language barriers influence students' performance in diagnostic assessments, particularly in scientific subjects taught in French? To do so, we adapted various methods. Starting from our research design, we used quasi-experimental one-group pre-test, post-test design. Adopting a mixed methods approach, we used two tests, one being bilingual, including French and Arabic translations, and the second one being monolingual, including French only. Later on, we conducted a focus group discussion after the very last test. The participants of this study were 27 primary level science students enrolled in a Moroccan public middle school. For data collection procedures, the two diagnostic tests were administered 2 weeks apart under nearly identical classroom conditions. For the data analysis, the quantitative part, we used paired sampled t-tests, correlations, and also descriptive statistic, all analyzed within R Commander software. For the qualitative part, we used focus groups, and of course, being that the data analysis, we used the thematic analysis of perceptions. For results, well, for the descriptive statistic results, as you can see here, the mean for the first test, the version including Arabic and French as a one test, of course the translation here are included as mentioned earlier, had a mean nearly 9.91. Well, in the French language version, the mean is only 5.20. The higher mean here is the mean of the very first test conducted in French and Arabic translations. Also, as you can see here, the maximum of this test is 16, while the maximum score possible for the French version is actually 11. That's a huge difference, nearly 5 points between the two tests, given the fact both these tests were identical in contents. As for correlations, surprisingly, the correlation was weak. Nearly we had R equivalent to 0.21, which is considered low alignment between both versions. However, for the correlation, the results were not statistically significant. For the paired sample t-test, the difference between the two sets of scores was indeed statistically significant, as the p-value was less of 0.001, indicating that the language of assessment had an actual measurable impact on students' diagnostic performance. As you can see clearly here in this figure, as the score 1 is for the Arabic and French version, and the score 2 here in blue is for the French only, the performance is higher in the French Arabic version nearly in all papers, IDs from paper 1 to paper 27. All of them, they demonstrated that the score in the French Arabic version is higher, while in the French version, the scores are generally low. And this is observed also here, as you can see in the box plot. For the Arabic translated version, the median is higher considering the other box plot of the French version only, which is lower, nearly 5 here. Well, generally most students scored higher in the bilingual version, confirming that the significant effect was indeed and surely a thing in this study. There is a significant mean difference found in both paired tests, and generally assessment or language of assessment did interfere with the actual performance and students' understanding and their assessment outcomes. For the qualitative findings, well, we had here mainly 3 themes. Starting with comprehension difficulties, here we noticed that most students had technical French phrasing causes confusion as a statement being said by them, meaning that these students do not understand the test and they cannot understand the phrasing in French. They do not know the words or the vocabulary. And the low results are not necessarily linked to the fact that they do not know the concepts, but they do not understand the words or the wording in French. For vocabulary barriers, well, as you can see here, quote, students said, we know the answer in Arabic, but the French words confuse us. Here, they told us that they know the answers, they knew the answers, but when they tried to actually write them in French or express them, they couldn't because they did not have the proper vocabulary. Moreover, some students did actually confuse instructions for some questions because they didn't understand them. And lastly, recognition of test similarity. Here, we noted that the same content felt harder in French-only tests. Well, mainly here only few students did recognize the fact that these two tests were identical. And even though those who recognize it, they couldn't actually answer properly. They even felt that the French version was harder only because it's indeed in French. As discussion, our findings really aligns with literature, especially with works of Ternawi in 2018, Haidar in 2024, Aznudinal in 2025, Al-Qadri in 2023, Maslinter, PD, and Gardner in 1989, as language significantly affects diagnostic assessment outcomes. Students' difficulties were linguistic and not really conceptual. And also, French only tasks increased anxiety and confusion. Well, these findings clearly show that the language of assessments influence how students perform diagnostic tests. The lower scores in French-only conditions were not due to weak scientific knowledge, but to linguistic and emotional barriers. Similar patterns were reported by these authors that I mentioned earlier. Students struggle not because they don't understand science, but because they cannot fully express that understanding in French. This highlights the need to rethink how diagnostic assessment are designed in multilingual systems like ours, as if we actually take diagnostic assessment outcomes and try to analyze them, forgetting and not taking into account that students have a huge problem in French, we might mistakenly think that these students have problems when it comes to conceptual things in science, for example, but these students, they do not have problems or they do not lack when it comes to concepts in science. They are lacking in language mainly. So here we mistake their needs and we will be able to help them if we don't pay attention and recognize that this problem is indeed real and it exists in our context and country mainly. Well, moving to implications and limitations, one of our study's limitations is the fact that the sample was kind of small. We used one school, 7 students. Well, we can say that from this sample, results could not be generalized, but we advise for future researchers to try to replicate our research protocol, perhaps in a larger samples. Also, translation may have slightly changed the difficulty of some items, perhaps. And finally, the focus group data reflect students' perceptions, their personal experience, not a direct performance measures. So we might be at fault for being subjective or for them being subjective in the way they perceive their performance and themselves. As implications for teaching and assessment, we suggest integrating bilingual glossars or key terms translations. Also, we suggest training for teachers on linguistic dimensions of assessment. Also, we suggest assessing ideas, not linguistic proficiencies. And lastly, we suggest highly promoting inclusive language awareness in testing practices. As a conclusion to our work, language and equity in assessment. Well, this study confirms that diagnostic assessment outcomes reflect the language of the test as much as the student's knowledge. When language barriers are reduced, assessment results become more accurate and less stressful. In multilingual contexts like Morocco, ensuring linguistic fairness isn't optional, it's a foundation for educational equity and ideally for education for everyone. If we don't, we might risk what we called or what it's called a language discrimination. And lastly, here's some key references that we used if you wish to see. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And of course, if you have any questions, we are here to answer. Thank you.